What is he saying about Joe Flacco, your favorite quarterback?
This is an old theme on this show.
Go ahead.
Stephen A., you might not remember this, but T-Sizzle and I used to go round and round and round again, as in round 1, 2, 3, and 4, who would get the knockdown over the quarterback that he always called Cool Joe. Not Joe Cool, but Cool Joe. Suggs used to tell me, hey, you don't get it, man. This kid is unflappable. He's unsinkable. He's unshakable. Nothing bothers this kid. He just steady as a rock, steady as it goes. I'd say he's just not good enough. So what happened 2 years ago in what turned out to be a Super Bowl year for those Ravens? Oh, boy. Joe Flacco, during that year, had 2 games in which he registered the 2 worst single-game QBRs of any quarterback in the National Football League. 2. But what happened at the end? They got hot. Why did they get hot? Joe played very well. But he was throwing some passes that should not have been caught that were by, remember Anquan Bolden, how hot he got in the playoffs? He's the hottest receiver in the playoffs. And off
Flacco
that,
played well, though.
he played well. I give it up. But did he play well enough to get, how much was it? 6 years and $120 million with $52 million
That was
guaranteed?
the going rate,
Yes,
Skip.
$52
That was
million
the going
guaranteed.
rate.
Even though Tony
You
Romo
realize-
came later. As long as Tony Romo got it, yes, he did.
Wait. Well, I never said Romo deserved it.
Dude, this is true.
Okay. The point here is, over the first 2 years of this deal, including this coming season, Joe Flacco, Cool Joe, will make $51 million. And you know what the truth is about the statements you just read?
Yeah.
The real F-bombs were quietly whispered by Ravens veterans during last regular season when, by the way, this team also went 8-8 because Cool Joe wasn't all that cool. The F-bombs were muttered when he threw any of his 22 interceptions. His QBR last year was 25th worst in the league because he went back to being Joe Flacco. Not that he's a terrible player, but he's got Flacco on him because when you least expect it, he won't just give you one bad throw like Romo will. He'll give you a 4 quarters worth of bad throws. So now, again, and I love Suggs. He's fun. I miss him on this show. We got to get him back on the show.
He's so good.
Yeah, and
he's watching.
He's a great football player.
He's good.
I love him. But the point is, now he's having to say, Joe, we need you to turn into more of a leader. We need a little fire and brimstone. We need you to start calling people out. Well, he can't when he's got the 25th worst QBR. He's got to live up to making $51 million over 2 years before he starts calling anybody out.
Well, first of all, I disagree with that for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're assuming that all of those interceptions are his fault, as opposed to dudes running the wrong routes. I'm just saying, this is what if they could say those things about Eli Manning, and that's what would transpire.
Can we say that about Tony Romo?
I'm saying if you could say that about Tony Romo, if you could say that about Eli Manning, you could say that about Joe Flacco. That's number one. Number two, he's a Super Bowl champion. Anybody that has cachet, it's a Super Bowl champion quarterback. And if anything, what T-Sizzle is saying is he should have done this last year because he was coming off the Super Bowl season, and you never had more clout in your career than you did coming off the Super Bowl championship season and the new fat contract. You could have held dudes accountable. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that when you're playing the quarterback position, you don't only have a license to hold people accountable, it's a mandate. And the reason why is because you have to be an extension of the coach on the football field and to some degree on those sidelines because you got to push guys. And the fact is you got a guy like Joe Flacco, you know, Joe Cool, that's not always a good thing. Sometimes you got to be willing to get in the guy's face. Sometimes you got to be willing to hold a guy accountable. I remember years ago I was interviewing Joe Montana, and the whole bit about some of these receivers, the TOs of the world and others making noise or complaining about a quarterback. I said, Joe Montana, what if that happened with you? He said, they wouldn't see the football for a little while. And I'd let them know it. So you got to do what you need to do to make sure you let everybody else know you're the captain.
What if you're not made like that? What if it's not in you to do that?
Well, again, that's not good, particularly when you're the quarterback and you may not deserve to be a quarterback. But I've seen Joe Flacco from time to time, you know, talking to somebody on the sidelines or whatever the case may be. I think what T-Sizzle is alluding to is being a bit more demonstrative and, dare I say, bombastic from the standpoint, look, we ain't playing. They talk, I never forget when I was ESPN radio in New York did some event with some of the stars from New York, and they had Justin Tuck there. And Justin Tuck, at the time, before he left for the Raiders, was talking about how they won the Super Bowl a few years back. and he said, yeah, we got the Tom Brady. We got the Tom Brady. But, man, we got a lot of respect for that brother. Boy, was he cussing those offensive linemen out. He was all in them. You know, you got to be able to do that sometimes, especially when your own health is at stake.
You brought up Joe Montana.
Yes.
Joe Montana was not a great leader. There was no fire and brimstone in Joe Montana. He's not going to call people out. He's not really vocal in the locker room or in the huddle. All he was the greatest quarterback ever. He led by example. Now, he might quietly decide, okay, you're not getting the football, but he's not going to jump in people's face and F-bomb them to get back in line.
I agree. Okay? And that's not necessarily the way everybody needs to go.
Okay, but the problem is Joe Flacco isn't Joe Montana.
Of course. Okay. Of course, but there's also a thing that you got to understand. It's about figuring out what works for you, as opposed to just throwing a daggone football. You got to figure out what works for you, because sometimes even your greatest effort doesn't measure up when it's not matched with assistance from somebody else that's supposed to be. You could be the greatest passer in the world, but if your receiver can't catch or can't run the correct routes, what difference does it make?
Okay, so bottom line, right now, gut feeling, and I know it's way early, do the Ravens make the playoffs? And
my gut feeling?
You can reserve the right to change that.
I reserve the right to change it, but my gut feeling is yes.
My gut feeling is no.
My gut feeling is yes, the wild card will come out the AFC North.